The USB drive arrived on what would have been Marcus's 35th birthday, exactly 14 months after the accident on I-76 that killed him. I found it in my mailbox that Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in brown paper with no return address, just my name written across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. The letters were careful, deliberate, like someone had taken their time forming each one. I stood there on my front step in Fishtown, holding this strange package, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was light, too light to contain anything that should matter. But my hands were shaking anyway, and I couldn't have explained why if someone had asked. The afternoon had that particular quality of late October light, golden and fading, the kind that made everything look both beautiful and temporary. Leaves were scattered across my steps, deep reds and burnt oranges, and I remembered how Marcus used to love this time of year. How he'd insist on taking the kids to every pumpkin patch within a 50-mile radius, coming home with more gourds than any family could reasonably use. That first autumn without him had been unbearable. Tyler had asked in September if we'd still go to the pumpkin patch, his voice small and uncertain, and I'd said yes because what else could I say? We'd gone to the same place we always went, the farm in Bucks County with the corn maze and the cider donuts. But everything felt wrong without Marcus there to lift Zoe onto his shoulders, to get deliberately lost in the maze just to make the kids laugh, to insist on buying the largest pumpkin even though it would barely fit in our car. This second autumn was different. Not easier, exactly. Just different. The sharp edges of grief had worn down into something I could carry without it cutting me open every moment. I could think about Marcus without my lungs forgetting how to work. I could see his photo without having to leave the room. But standing there with that package in my hands, I felt something shift. A premonition, maybe. That sense you get when you're standing at the edge of something significant, when the world is about to reorganize itself around new information. When I finally went inside and plugged it into my laptop that night after putting the kids to bed, a single video file appeared on the screen. Just one file, labeled with a date from 3 years ago. And Marcus's face in the thumbnail, frozen mid-sentence, looking at me from somewhere in the past. My finger hovered over the play button. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, in my wrists, behind my eyes, because I knew. Somehow, I already knew that whatever was on this drive was going to change everything. You develop an instinct for these moments after you've lived through enough of them. The second, before the doctor comes back into the room. The pause, before someone tells you they're leaving. That held breath before the world shifts. I thought about the last time I'd seen Marcus alive. The morning of the accident, he'd woken up early, already dressed for work by the time I opened my eyes. He'd sat on the edge of our bed, and I'd asked him why he was up so early. He'd said he had a meeting downtown, something important. Then he'd leaned over and kissed my forehead, his hand gentle against my cheek. "I love you more than words can say," he'd told me, and I'd laughed sleepily and said, "That's very poetic for 6 a.m. "I mean it," he'd said. And there had been something in his voice, something I hadn't understood then. An intensity, an urgency. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that. Everything I've done, everything I do, it's all for you and the kids." I'd thought it was sweet but strange. Had teased him about being dramatic. Had rolled over and gone back to sleep for 20 more minutes before my alarm went off. If I'd known those would be the last words we'd exchange, would I have said something different? Would I have held on to that moment longer? Memorized the exact shade of morning light on his face? The precise timbre of his voice? But before I could press play on the video, my phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen, and I felt that old familiar tightening in my chest, the one that had been there since childhood, since I was old enough to understand that I wasn't quite what they'd wanted, wasn't quite right. I stared at her name for 3 rings before answering. In that small space of time, I considered letting it go to voicemail, considered pretending I hadn't seen it. But habit and obligation ran deep, patterns carved into me over 33 years. I answered, and she said they were coming over for Sunday dinner. Not asking, telling. The dinner I'd apparently agreed to 3 weeks ago, though I had no memory of it. 3 weeks ago I'd still been in that fog where days blurred together, and I moved through the world like I was underwater, watching everything happen from very far away. "This Sunday?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes, dear. We discussed this. You said it would be nice to have family around." Had I said that? Maybe. In those early months after Marcus died, I'd said a lot of things I didn't remember, agreed to things I would never have agreed to if I'd been fully present in my own life. I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her I couldn't do it, not tonight. Not when I had this drive burning a hole in my consciousness. But the words that came out of my mouth were, "Okay, what time?" "We're actually already on our way," she said brightly. "Derek and Jason are with us, and Rachel too. We thought it would be nice to all be together." My stomach dropped. Of course they did. Of course they were already coming. Decision made. No room for me to back out or prepare or brace myself. I looked at my laptop screen, at Marcus's frozen face waiting for me, at the secrets he'd left behind, at whatever truth was about to reshape my understanding of everything. "How far away are you?" I managed to ask. "Oh, maybe 20 minutes? We're just crossing the bridge now." 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes to compose myself, to hide the USB drive, to push down whatever I was feeling and put on the mask of the grateful daughter, the bereaved widow who appreciated her family's concern. I'd been wearing that mask for 14 months. What was one more night? They arrived like a weather system 20 minutes later, filling my narrow Fishtown row home with noise and bodies and opinions. My mother immediately went to my kitchen and started opening cabinets, reorganizing things with that particular brand of helpfulness that felt like criticism. My father turned on the Phillies game without asking, settling into my couch like he owned the place. My brothers, Derek and Jason, both successful in finance and never shy about reminding everyone, sprawled across my living room furniture with beers they'd brought themselves, talking loudly about some deal one of them had just closed. Rachel, my older sister, gave me a quick hug that didn't quite reach, then went to help Mom in the kitchen. The way we always did. The way we'd always done. I stood in my own doorway feeling like a stranger in my own life. The house suddenly felt smaller with all of them in it. This narrow row home that Marcus and I had bought when I was pregnant with Tyler. The house we'd chosen because it was all we could afford at the time. Marcus's software company had just been getting started, and money was tight. We'd loved this house anyway. Loved the exposed brick in the living room, the tiny backyard where we'd planted tomatoes that never quite thrived, the second floor with its creaky floorboards that had announced middle-of-the-night trips to crying babies. My mother had hated it from the beginning. Too small, she'd said, in a neighborhood that wasn't quite nice enough. Too much of a fixer-upper for a young couple with a baby on the way. "You could have stayed in our guest house," she'd said when we first moved in. "Saved money. Been somewhere safer." But Marcus had wanted our own place. Our own space. Somewhere we could build our life without my family's constant observation and commentary. Now I watched my mother move through my kitchen like she was cataloging all my failures. Noticed her frowning at the dishes in the sink, the mail piled on the counter, the general state of managed chaos that came with working part-time and raising 2 kids alone. Tyler and Zoe came downstairs, drawn by the noise. My son was 11 now, tall for his age like his father had been. My daughter was 8, with Marcus's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. They looked uncertain, hovering at the bottom of the stairs. They'd been getting better, both of them. Tyler had stopped crying himself to sleep every night about 6 months ago. Zoe had finally stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. They'd started laughing again at dinner, fighting over normal things like whose turn it was to pick the movie, being children instead of small broken things trying to navigate grief they were too young to understand. But I saw them tense when they saw my family. Saw them read the room the way they'd learned to do. assessing whether this was safe, whether they needed to protect themselves or me. My mother saw them and brightened in that performative way she had, the look that said she was about to say something she thought was kind, but would land like a stone in water. "There are my grandbabies," she said, coming over to kiss their foreheads. Zoe accepted it. Tyler stepped back slightly, just out of reach. He'd been doing that more lately, creating distance, choosing when and how to accept affection. Marcus would have been proud of him for that, for establishing boundaries. Marcus had always been clear about the importance of teaching kids they had autonomy over their own bodies, that they didn't owe anyone physical affection just because they were asked for it. They'd been doing that lately, both of them, creating small distances, reading the room in ways children shouldn't have to. We sat down to eat the dinner my mother had somehow produced from my kitchen, using ingredients I didn't remember buying. Pot roast and potatoes and green beans that had probably been frozen. The kind of meal she'd made every Sunday of my childhood, the kind that was supposed to mean family and comfort, but had always just made me feel trapped. My father dominated the conversation, talking about the Phillies, about politics, about some issue with their homeowners association. Derek jumped in with stories about his latest acquisition. Jason made jokes that weren't quite funny, but everyone laughed at anyway. I pushed food around my plate and thought about the video file waiting on my laptop upstairs, about Marcus's face frozen in that thumbnail, about the secrets he'd kept and why he'd kept them, and what it meant that someone had sent them to me now, 14 months after his death. Who had sent it? Someone who knew Marcus. Someone who knew about whatever was on that video. Someone who'd waited, deliberately until now. And then Zoe, sweet Zoe, who noticed everything, looked at my mother and asked, "Grandma, why do you look sad?" The table went quiet. My mother's face did something complicated, a series of micro-expressions I'd spent my whole life learning to read. She glanced at me, then back at Zoe, and I felt that old familiar dread start to build. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, reaching over to touch Zoe's hand. "I'm just thinking about how life is full of surprises. Sometimes God gives us more than we can handle to teach us lessons." I felt my jaw tighten. That phrase. More than we can handle. She'd said the same thing when Marcus died, had told me at the funeral that God never gave us more than we could handle, that this was all part of some larger plan. I'd wanted to scream at her then that Marcus dying in a car accident at 33 wasn't a lesson from God. It was just terrible random chance, the universe being cruel and meaningless. But I'd been too numb to scream, too broken to argue. My father nodded, not looking up from his plate. "Your grandmother and I always said we should have stopped it too." He gestured vaguely toward Derek and Jason. "Two boys, nice and simple, everything balanced and manageable. But then we had your Aunt Rachel, and then your mom, and well, families get complicated when you don't plan carefully." Something cracked inside my sternum. I felt it physically, like ice breaking. The words hit me like they always did, like they'd been hitting me my whole life. The casual dismissal. The suggestion that my existence was a mistake, a complication, something that had disrupted their perfect family plan. I'd heard variations of this my entire childhood. Heard it when I was 7 and spilled juice on the carpet. This is why we should have stopped it too. Heard it when I was 12 and got a B in math. The boys never struggled like this. Heard it when I was 16 and wanted to go to art school instead of business school. We don't understand where this came from. The boys are so practical. Tyler's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Zoe looked confused, her 8-year-old brain working to process what she'd just heard. I watched her face as she tried to understand, saw the moment the words penetrated, saw her eyes widen slightly. She was smart, my daughter. Too smart for her own good sometimes. "What Grandpa means," my mother said, and she was looking directly at me now, not at Zoe, "is that sometimes people make choices that seem fine at the time, but turn out to be mistakes. like your mom marrying someone we barely knew, someone who turned out to be hiding things from all of us. The words landed like punches, each one carefully aimed, perfectly weighted. They'd never approved of Marcus. From the moment I brought him home to meet them, they'd been suspicious. He was too charming, they said, too polished. Where exactly had he gone to school? What did his parents do? How had he really made his money? I'd told them he'd started a software company, that he was an entrepreneur. They'd exchanged those looks, the ones that said they knew better, that I was being naive. Be careful, my mother had told me when Marcus and I got engaged. Men who seem perfect usually have something to hide. But Marcus hadn't been perfect. He'd been real. He'd been kind and funny and patient with my family's suspicions. He'd been a devoted father who read bedtime stories in silly voices and never missed a school play. He'd been my partner, my best friend, the person who saw me more clearly than anyone ever had. Tyler stood up, his chair scraping against my floor. Dad wasn't hiding anything. His voice cracked on the last word. 11 years old and already learning to defend his father's memory. Already taking on weight he shouldn't have to carry. My heart broke watching him. He looked so much like Marcus in that moment. The same stubborn set to his jaw. The same way of standing up straight when challenged. The same refusal to let injustice pass without comment. Of course not, honey, my mother said in that voice that meant exactly the opposite. But adults have complicated lives. Your father's business dealings, all those late nights he worked, all that travel he did. A lot of secrets, sweetie. A lot of things that didn't quite add up. She said it gently, kindly even, which made it worse. The late nights she mentioned had been real. Marcus had traveled frequently, sometimes for a week at a time. He'd miss dinners, miss bedtimes. I'd asked him about it occasionally. Asked if he needed to be gone so much, and he'd always said the same thing. I'm building something. For us. For the kids' future. It won't always be like this. And I'd believed him because I loved him, because he'd never given me reason not to trust him, because when he was home, he was fully present. No phone calls during dinner, no laptop open while the kids told him about their day. Just him, with us, completely there. My father unmuted the TV long enough to add, "We're just saying, Claire, that maybe now that you've had some time, you can see we had valid concerns from the beginning. Marcus was charming, absolutely. No one's denying that. But what do you actually know about him? Really know? His family, his past, where all that money really came from?" The question hung in the air, and the terrible thing was, I didn't have good answers. Marcus had told me his parents died when he was young, that he'd been raised by distant relatives, that talking about his childhood was painful. I'd respected that. Hadn't pushed for details he clearly didn't want to give. His family hadn't been at our wedding. He'd said he wasn't close with any of them, that they wouldn't understand our relationship. It had seemed romantic at the time, the two of us building something new without the weight of complicated family histories. Now, sitting at my dinner table with my family implying my dead husband had been a criminal, I wondered what I'd missed, what signs I'd overlooked, what questions I should have asked, and I hated myself for wondering, for letting their doubts become my doubts. I looked at my children's faces. Tyler's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the edge of the table. Zoe looked like she might cry. And I looked at my parents, my siblings, all of them sitting in my home, eating food in my kitchen, talking about my dead husband like he was a problem we could finally be honest about now that he wasn't here to defend himself, and I made a choice that would change everything. "Get out," I said quietly. My mother blinked. "What?" "Get out. All of you. Now." The words felt like they came from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I hadn't accessed in years. Some core of strength I'd forgotten existed. My father's face went red. "Claire, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear. You came into my home and told my children that they were mistakes, that I was a mistake, that their father was a criminal, so get out." "We didn't say that," Rachel protested. "Mom was just—" "I know exactly what Mom was doing, what she's always done, what all of you have always done. And I'm done with it. Take your things and leave." Derek stood up, using his height to try to intimidate me the way he'd done since we were kids. He was 6'2", built like the athlete he'd been in high school. He stepped closer, looming, the way he used to do when we were teenagers and I'd disagree with him about something. It had always worked before. I'd always backed down. Not tonight. "You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. You've been through a lot." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Clearer than I have in months. Get out of my house." My mother had started crying, those practiced tears that had always made me feel guilty before. "We're just trying to help. We're worried about you, about the children. We want what's best. What's best is for you to leave, now, before I say things I can't take back." Though really, I thought, what could I possibly say that would be worse than what they'd already said? What words could I use that would cut deeper than hearing my own father say I was a mistake while my children sat at the table? They left, my mother crying those tears that were designed to make me feel guilty, my father blustering about disrespect and ingratitude, my brothers exchanging those looks that said I'd finally proven their point about my instability, Rachel trailing behind, not quite meeting my eyes. I watched from my front window as they got into Derek's car, watched them sit there for a moment before driving away. Probably talking about me, probably agreeing that grief had made me irrational, that I'd regret this, that they'd been right to worry. Let them talk. Let them think whatever they wanted to think. The door closed behind them, and the sudden silence felt like breathing pure oxygen after years underwater. My house felt bigger without them in it. The air felt lighter. I could breathe without feeling like I was taking up space I didn't deserve. Tyler looked at me with something like awe. Zoe came over and wrapped her arms around my waist, pressing her face into my stomach. "Are we really mistakes?" she asked, her voice muffled. The question destroyed me. That my 8-year-old daughter had to ask this. That my parents' careless cruelty had planted this seed of doubt in her mind. I knelt down so I could look at her properly, so she could see my face when I answered. Tyler came closer too, standing just behind his sister, his hand on her shoulder. "No, baby. No. You and your brother are the best things that ever happened to me. And your dad wasn't hiding anything bad. I promise you that. I'm going to prove it to you." "How?" Tyler asked. His voice was thick with tears he was trying not to shed. I thought about the USB drive upstairs, about Marcus's face frozen on my laptop screen, about whatever truth was waiting for me. "I'm going to show you who your father really was," I said. "All of it. Everything. No more secrets. No more doubts." After I got them back to bed, reading an extra story, answering questions about why Grandma said those things, explaining that sometimes grown-ups are wrong, I went back downstairs and sat at my laptop with Marcus's video file waiting. It was past 10 now. The house was quiet, except for the usual sounds of old floorboards settling, the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of someone's TV through the thin walls of the row home. I'd made tea, chamomile that had gone cold while I'd dealt with my children's questions and fears. The mug sat beside my laptop, forgotten. My hand was steadier this time when I clicked play. His face filled the screen, and God, I'd forgotten the exact shade of his eyes. That particular brown that looked almost amber in certain light. I'd forgotten the way his left eyebrow sat slightly higher than his right. The small scar on his chin from a childhood accident he'd told me about once. Looking at him was like being stabbed and healed at the same time. He was sitting in his office, I realized. The office in the building downtown where his company had been located. I recognized the bookshelf behind him, the window that looked out onto Market Street. He was wearing the blue sweater I'd bought him for his birthday 3 years ago, the one he'd said was too expensive but had worn constantly anyway. When had he recorded this? The date on the file said 3 years ago, but when exactly? What had prompted him to sit down and make this video? Claire, he said, and his voice was exactly as I remembered it, and nothing like I remembered it. Because recordings never capture everything. They can't capture the way his voice would soften when he said my name first thing in the morning, or the way it would deepen when he was tired, or the way it would catch slightly when he was emotional. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if I'm gone, certain things are about to happen. People are going to come asking questions. People are going to challenge you. People are going to try to take things from you. And you're going to discover things about me that will seem impossible. He paused, ran his hand through his hair. I knew that gesture. He did it when he was nervous, when he was trying to figure out how to explain something complicated. He looked directly into the camera, directly at me across time and death, and said, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I made these choices without you. But I need you to understand why I did it. And I need you to understand what I've left for you. Not just money. Not just security. Something bigger than that. I realized I was holding my breath. Let it out slowly, deliberately, and pressed play again. The video ran for 47 minutes. I sat frozen the entire time, not moving, barely breathing, as Marcus explained what I'd married into without knowing. He'd been born Markin Kowalczyk in Warsaw, brought to Philadelphia at age 7 when his father defected. His father had been a high-level intelligence analyst in the Polish government who'd accumulated information about corruption, human rights abuses, financial crimes extending across Eastern Europe. When he finally had enough evidence to know his own life was in danger, he'd contacted American intelligence services and made a deal. Safe passage for his family, new identities, protection, and in return, everything he knew. The Americans had agreed. Young Marcian became Marcus Chen, a name chosen specifically for its ambiguity, its ability to be Polish or Asian or anything really, a name that would help him disappear into American life. We were supposed to stay quiet, Marcus said in the video. Keep our heads down, blend in, never draw attention. My father worked as a consultant, using his expertise without anyone knowing where it came from. My mother worked as a teacher. We were supposed to be invisible. I thought about the stories Marcus had told me about his childhood, or rather, the stories he hadn't told. The way he'd deflect when I asked about his parents, change the subject when I pressed for details. The way he'd said his past was painful and complicated, and he preferred to focus on our future instead. I'd thought he was being private, protecting himself from old wounds. I hadn't realized he was protecting me. But Marcus hadn't been able to stay invisible. He'd watched his father eat himself alive with guilt over the people he hadn't been able to save, the information he hadn't been able to get out in time. He'd watched his mother wake up screaming from nightmares about the family they'd left behind. His mother had died when he was 19, Marcus explained in the video. A stroke that the doctors said came from decades of untreated stress and anxiety. His father had followed 2 years later, liver failure from years of drinking to cope with the memories. They gave up everything for us to be safe, Marcus said, and his voice broke slightly. Their country, their family, their careers, their language. My mother never spoke Polish again after we came here. Said it hurt too much. My father would wake up in the middle of the night and write things down, information he remembered, names of people who needed help. Then he'd burn the pages in the morning like evidence. I watched tears slide down Marcus's face in the video, watched him wipe them away impatiently. I was 21 when my father died, he continued. Alone in America with a name that wasn't really mine, a history I couldn't talk about, and a trust fund from the government settlement that felt like blood money. I was supposed to just live quietly, stay invisible, stay safe. And when he was old enough, smart enough, bold enough, he'd decided to build something. "I built my software company with clean money," Marcus said. "The initial capital came from my father's settlement with the government when they finally closed his case. That part is completely legitimate and documented. What's complicated is what I did with the success." Over 15 years, Marcus had quietly built a network of investments and holdings designed to do one thing: protect dissidents, whistleblowers, and refugees trying to expose authoritarian corruption. He'd created digital infrastructure for secure communications. He'd funded legal defenses for journalists facing prosecution. He'd created false trails and safe houses for people who needed to disappear. He'd made it possible for truth to be told when telling it could get you killed. The software company had been real, he explained. It had created legitimate products, had legitimate clients, made real money. But it had also been cover for the other work. The late nights had been meetings with people who needed help. The business trips had been extractions, relocations, security consultations. Every time I'd kissed him goodbye at the airport, he'd been going to save someone. And he'd made enemies. Powerful ones. "The accident that killed me probably wasn't an accident," he said. And I felt my whole body go cold. "I've had 3 close calls in the last 2 years. Someone tampered with my car's brakes. Someone tried to access my office after hours. Someone's been following me, though they're good enough that I can't prove it." I thought about the accident. The police report had said a tractor-trailer crossed lanes on I-76, clipped Marcus's car, sent him into the median. The truck driver had been cited for reckless driving, but claimed his steering had malfunctioned. Mechanical failure, the investigation concluded. Terrible luck. But what if it hadn't been luck? What if someone had caused it? He paused, ran his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was anxious. "But that's not what matters now. What matters is that I spent the last 3 years of my life making sure you and the kids would be protected, provided for, and positioned to continue the work if you choose. I've built you a foundation, Claire. Everything you need to be safe, to be independent, to be powerful in ways your family never let you imagine you could be." He leaned closer to the camera. "You're stronger than you think. You're smarter than they ever let you believe. You're capable of things that would terrify them, and I love you for all of it. For who you are when no one's watching. For who you could be if you let yourself." The video ended with an address in Old City and a date, next Tuesday, 3 p.m. "James will be waiting for you," Marcus said. "He'll explain everything." The screen went black. I sat in the darkness of my living room, in my house in Fishtown that suddenly felt too small to contain what I'd just learned, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Really cried, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest and doesn't stop for a long time. I cried for Marcus, for the life he'd lived that I'd only known part of. I cried for his father who'd died 5 years ago without me knowing what he'd really sacrificed. I cried for his mother who'd given up her language, her country, her identity. I cried for the years we could have had if he'd lived. I cried for my children who'd lost him. I cried for myself, for the woman I'd been who'd believed what her family told her about herself. And then I stopped crying, and I started reading. The USB drive contained folders. So many folders. Financial documents, legal papers, encrypted files that required passwords Marcus had hidden in the video. Moments where he'd said phrases that seemed random but weren't. I worked through the night while my children slept upstairs, piecing together what Marcus had built. The first folder contained a document titled, "For Claire, Start Here." It was a letter, typed this time, explaining the structure of everything that followed. Written in Marcus's precise, clear style, anticipating my questions, walking me through the complexity. There were assets worth $23 million, not all in one place, spread across accounts and investments and properties, structured in ways that made them nearly impossible to trace or seize. Legal documents establishing me as the sole controller of 7 different LLCs, each one serving a specific purpose in the network Marcus had created. Property deeds I'd never seen. A brownstone in Rittenhouse Square, a building in Old City, a house in the suburbs that I'd thought belonged to one of Marcus's business associates. All of them in my name now, transferred through trusts that had activated automatically upon his death. I stared at the brownstone deed. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, fully renovated 2 years ago, located on one of the most expensive blocks in Rittenhouse Square. Marcus had bought this while we were living in our tiny row home in Fishtown, had renovated it without me knowing, had put it in my name and never mentioned it. Why? Why not tell me? Why not move us there? But I knew why. Because moving into a mansion in Rittenhouse Square would have raised questions, would have made us visible, would have put targets on our backs. He'd been protecting us by keeping us invisible. And names, dozens of names with brief notes beside them. James Okonkwo appeared repeatedly, marked with a star. Trusts you completely, Marcus had written next to his name. Will explain everything. He's been preparing for 3 years to help you. There were other names too. Patricia Huang, attorney, David Morales, accountant, Yuki Tanaka, digital security specialist, each with notes about how Marcus had helped them, what their role in the network was, how to contact them. I read through the night, stopping only when I heard Tyler get up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m. I froze, listening to his footsteps, praying he wouldn't come downstairs and find me like this, surrounded by documents about his father's secret life. He went back to bed. I kept reading. By the time the sun started to rise, turning my living room window from black to gray to pale gold, I understood. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Marcus had built an empire designed to protect people, and he'd left it to me. I called in sick to work on Tuesday. I'd been working part-time at a library in Northern Liberties, shelving books and helping with children's programs, a job I'd taken to fill the hours after Marcus died. It paid almost nothing and had no benefits, but it gave me somewhere to go, something to do with my hands. My boss, Linda, was understanding. "Take all the time you need," she said. "We'll manage." I wondered what she'd think if she knew. If she knew that the widow who shelved books in the children's section was about to walk into a meeting about a $23 million network designed to protect journalists and whistleblowers. I dressed carefully that morning. Not too formal, nothing that would draw attention. Just dark jeans and a simple sweater. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Thinner than I'd been before Marcus died. Hollows under my eyes from too many sleepless nights. But something else too. Something harder. Something that hadn't been there before. Now I stood outside looking at the building on Market Street, the address from Marcus's video. I'd walked past it 100 times without noticing it. 4 stories, brick facade, anonymous in the way so many Philadelphia buildings are anonymous. The directory in the lobby listed Okonkwo and Associates, Suite 407. The elevator was old, the kind with an interior gate that had to be pulled closed. It creaked as it rose, and I found myself counting floors. 1, 2, 3, 4. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, smelling faintly of coffee and paper. Muted sounds came from behind closed doors. A phone ringing, someone typing. The ordinary sounds of office work. I knocked on the door marked 407. The man who opened it was tall, maybe 6'3", in his 60s with silver threading through his hair. He had scars on his hands, visible when he reached out to shake mine, and eyes that had seen things they couldn't forget, things they couldn't unsee. "Mrs. Chen," he said, and his voice broke slightly on my name. "Claire, I've been waiting to meet you for 3 years." His hand was warm, his grip firm but careful, like he was aware of his own strength and deliberately gentle with it. He stepped back to let me in. The office was larger than it looked from outside, with windows facing Market Street and furniture that was expensive without being showy. There were photographs on the walls. Groups of people I didn't recognize, places I'd never been. James saw me looking. Clients, he said. People Marcus helped. People we're still helping. I stepped closer to one photograph. A family, parents, and 3 children, standing in front of what looked like a school. They were smiling, but there was something in their eyes. Relief, maybe, or the residue of fear finally fading. That's the Ahmadi family, James said quietly. Afghanistan. The father worked as a translator for American forces. When the government fell, they had 48 hours to get out before the Taliban found them. Marcus arranged everything. New identities, travel documents, housing in Philadelphia. The youngest daughter starts college this fall. He gestured to a chair and I sat. He sat across from me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. "You watched the video," he said. It wasn't a question. "Last night." "All of it?" "Twice." He nodded slowly. "Then you know most of it, the foundation of it. But there's more." There's always more with Marcus. He thought in layers, in contingencies. He prepared for scenarios I couldn't even imagine. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." James Okonkwo had been a journalist in Nigeria, he explained. An investigative reporter covering government corruption, environmental disasters, human rights abuses. He'd been good at it. Too good. The story that finally made him a target had exposed embezzlement schemes at the highest levels of government. Millions of dollars meant for infrastructure projects that had disappeared into private accounts. Within a week of publishing, his family received threats. His colleagues started disappearing. His office was raided, his computers seized, his sources intimidated into silence. "I had 72 hours, James said. Maybe less. Someone left a note on my car that said I should leave the country while I still could. They'd already gotten to my editor, my publisher. My wife called me crying, saying there were men watching our house. He told me about leaving everything behind, his career, his home, his country, about hiding in Lagos while trying to figure out how to get his family to safety, about the terror of knowing that every minute he stayed put them all in more danger. He fled with nothing but his laptop and the clothes he wore, leaving behind everything else. His wife and 3 children went to stay with family in the countryside while he figured out what to do. I had information, he said. Evidence I'd compiled for years. Names, account numbers, documented payments. Enough to bring down entire networks. But I had nowhere to go with it. No one I could trust. Every official channel was compromised. He'd been hiding in Lagos, moving between safe houses, when someone contacted him through an encrypted channel. Someone who said they could help. Marcus found me through a network of people who help people like me, James said. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about him except that he had resources and he seemed to understand what I needed. The first message had been simple. You're in danger. I can help. Do you want to live? James had thought it might be a trap, a way to draw him out, identify his location. But he was running out of options, running out of time. And sometimes you have to trust strangers because there's no one else left to trust. Marcus had gotten James's family out first, arranged travel documents, flights, a place for them to stay in Philadelphia. Then he'd worked on James himself, creating a paper trail that made it look like he'd died in a car accident in Benin City. He gave me a new life, James said. New identity, new papers, got me into the United States as a refugee under a program he'd helped create, set me up here in Philadelphia with housing, with money to get started. And then, this is the extraordinary part, he hired me. Marcus had trained James in digital security, in financial structures, in all the mechanisms he'd built over 15 years. Taught him how the network operated, how to protect people, how to move money and information without leaving traces. He told me I had valuable skills, James said. That my experience as an investigative journalist meant I understood how to verify information, how to assess credibility, how to find truth in complicated situations. He said those skills were exactly what the network needed. "He was preparing me to help you," James said. "He told me 3 years ago that if something happened to him, I'd need to be ready. He said you were smarter and stronger than you knew, and that once you understood what he'd built, you'd know what to do with it." He opened a folder on the desk between us and pulled out photographs. 3 people I didn't recognize. "These are the people who want what Marcus built," he said. "Not just the money, though they'd take that too. They want the network, the infrastructure, the information. They've been circling since his death, waiting for you to stumble." The first photograph showed a man in his 50s, pale skin, expensive suit, cold eyes. "Alexei Volkov," James explained. "A business consultant in New York with ties to Russian oligarchs who'd had assets seized by international sanctions. Marcus had helped create some of the documentation that led to those seizures. He blames Marcus for losing him access to hundreds of millions of dollars," James said. "He's been trying to find ways to attack the network for years." James pulled out another file, this one thicker. Documentation of Volkov's activities, attempts to hack Marcus's systems, legal filings designed to harass, threats made through intermediaries. "Marcus was always one step ahead of him," James said, "anticipated his moves, protected the network. But now that Marcus is gone, Volkov thinks he has an opening, thinks a grieving widow will be easier to manipulate or intimidate." The second photograph was a woman, Asian, maybe 40, with sharp features and harder eyes. Vivian Chen, a distant cousin of the family that had taken Marcus in when he arrived in America. She claimed Marcus had stolen her inheritance to build his company, used family connections improperly, owed her millions. "It's nonsense," James said. "Complete fabrication. She never had any legitimate business relationship with Marcus or his adoptive family. But she's been sending threatening letters for 6 years, filing lawsuits that get dismissed, harassing anyone associated with Marcus's work." The third was a man in his 60s, American, with the look of someone who'd been successful once and was angry about losing it. Richard Morrison. He'd been Marcus's business partner in the early days of the software company, until Marcus discovered he was embezzling and forced him out. "Morrison sued twice," James said, "lost both times. But he's never accepted it. He's spent years trying to prove Marcus defrauded him, that the company should have been his, that he deserves compensation." I looked at the 3 faces, these people who hated my husband, who wanted to destroy what he'd built. "What do they want from me?" I asked. "Everything," James said simply. "They want you overwhelmed, frightened, broken. They want you to make mistakes, sign things you shouldn't sign, give up control, walk away from the assets because managing them seems too complicated." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "They think you're weak. They think you're just a grieving widow who worked at a library. They think you don't have the capacity or the knowledge to stand up to them." "Are they right?" I asked. James smiled. "Marcus didn't think so. And Marcus was rarely wrong about people." He leaned forward. "They've already started. Volkov's lawyers filed motions yesterday to freeze Marcus's assets pending investigation into suspicious financial activity. They're claiming fraud, money laundering, connections to criminal enterprises. None of it's true, but the allegations alone can tie things up for months." My chest tightened. "I have tuition due next month. The mortgage—" "I know," James said. "The timing isn't coincidental. They're trying to hit you when you're vulnerable, when you have immediate financial pressure. They think you'll panic." I thought about Tyler's school, the private school Marcus had insisted on, the one with the good art program because Tyler loved to draw. $12,000 for the spring semester, due in 3 weeks. I thought about the mortgage on the Fishtown house, the car payment, the medical bills from Marcus's accident that insurance hadn't fully covered. They were counting on me being desperate, being scared. "What do I do?" He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "You let me show you what Marcus really left you. Not just money. Power." Over the next week, James walked me through the network Marcus had built, and it was so much bigger than I'd imagined. The building we sat in? Marcus owned it. Not just Suite 407, but the entire building. 8 stories of office space in Old City, purchased 4 years ago through one of the LLCs now in my name. My name had been on the deed the whole time. I just hadn't known it. The renovation on the 4th floor that had been ongoing for 2 years, that was a secure operations center with encryption capabilities that James said were beyond anything available commercially. Marcus had spent an estimated $3.7 million building it, designing every detail himself. "Come see," James said, and took me down 1 floor. We took the stairs instead of the elevator. James moved quietly for such a large man, each step deliberate and controlled. The stairwell was clean but plain, painted concrete and metal railings. He used a key card to open the door marked 4, and I stepped into another world. The 4th floor didn't look like offices. It looked like something from a movie about hackers or spies. Banks of computers, multiple monitors, servers humming in climate-controlled rooms, communications equipment I didn't recognize, a conference room with walls that James said were shielded against electronic surveillance. A young woman looked up from one of the computer stations. She had purple-tipped hair and wore a t-shirt that said, "I void warranties" in pixelated letters. "Yuki," James said. "This is Claire." The woman stood up immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to something like reverence. "Mrs. Chen, I've been waiting to meet you. Marcus talked about you all the time." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to respond to this stranger who apparently knew my husband, knew things about our life. "Yuki handles our digital security," James explained. "She's the best in the world at what she does. Marcus recruited her 5 years ago. We can communicate with anyone, anywhere," he explained. "Completely encrypted, untraceable. We can move money without leaving digital footprints. We can create documentation that will pass any inspection. We can hide people, information, evidence, whatever's needed to protect truth-tellers." I stood in the middle of all this technology, all this capability, and felt dizzy. Marcus built this? Marcus designed it. Then he hired the best people he could find to build it properly. Some of them are people he helped. Some of them just believe in the work. All of them are waiting to meet you. Over the next hour, James introduced me to 6 different people working on the 4th floor. Each of them part of Marcus's network. Each of them committed to the work. David Morales, the accountant who'd exposed pharmaceutical fraud and needed protection. He now managed the financial structures that kept the network running, that moved money invisibly across borders. Sarah Kim, a lawyer who'd fled South Korea after revealing judicial corruption. She now handled immigration cases for refugees the network was helping. Ahmed Hassan, a security specialist who'd worked in military intelligence before blowing the whistle on contractor fraud. He now designed protection protocols for high-risk extractions. Each of them told me the same thing. Marcus had saved their lives, and now they were using their skills to save others. The life insurance policy I'd known about covered $2 million. I'd received that payout 6 months after Marcus died, after all the paperwork finally cleared. It had seemed like an enormous amount of money at the time. But there were other policies. 11 of them, actually, totaling another $11 million, all structured through trusts that would release funds on specific timelines. Some wouldn't activate until Tyler and Zoe turned 25. He was thinking decades ahead, James said. He knew if something happened to him, you'd need resources. But he also knew that if you suddenly had access to all of it at once, it would make you a target. So he staggered it, protected you by parceling things out over time. The properties were the same way. I'd gotten the house in Fishtown immediately because I needed somewhere to live. But the brownstone in Rittenhouse Square wouldn't transfer to my full control for another 2 years. The building we stood in wouldn't fully transfer for 5. Why? I asked. Because if you'd gotten everything at once, Volkov and the others would have descended immediately. But this way, they keep discovering new assets, new complications. It keeps them off balance, makes them uncertain about what else is out there. It was brilliant, I realized. Marcus had turned the complexity itself into protection. He pulled up another document on his computer, a spreadsheet with names and numbers. These are the people in the network, he said. 23 of them scattered across Philadelphia and 4 other cities. Lawyers, accountants, security specialists, tech experts. People Marcus helped who now work for what he created. People who've been waiting for your call. I scrolled through the names, reading the brief descriptions beside each one. A lawyer who'd fled persecution in Turkey. An accountant who'd exposed pharmaceutical company fraud and needed protection. A security expert who'd worked in the military before blowing the whistle on contractor corruption. They were all people Marcus had saved. And now they worked to save others. He built you an army, James said quietly, not to fight wars, to fight for truth. On Thursday, exactly as James had predicted, Alexei Volkov's lawyers filed their motion to freeze Marcus's assets. The filing was 47 pages long, full of allegations and insinuations and carefully worded accusations that stopped just short of claiming anything they'd have to prove. Suspicious patterns of financial transfers, connections to individuals under investigation, failure to properly document sources of funds. The language was designed to sound damning without actually stating anything concrete. James called me as soon as the filing hit. "Don't panic," he said. "This is exactly what we expected. Patricia's already drafting our response." Patricia Huang was Marcus's lawyer, one of the names on the list James had shown me. She worked at a white shoe firm on Walnut Street, but she devoted about 30 hours a week to network cases. Marcus had paid her enough that she could afford to. I met her at her office that Friday. She was in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of controlled intensity that made you want to sit up straight. Her office was on the 20th floor, with views of City Hall and the Schuylkill River. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. Law books lined one wall, but I noticed they were arranged by color, not by topic. Aesthetic rather than functional. "I've been preparing for this for 18 months, she said, sliding a bound document across her desk. Marcus and I wargamed every possible attack. Volkov, Morrison, Vivian Chen, 3 other individuals who might try something. We have responses ready for all of them." The document she showed me wasn't just a legal response. It was a counterattack. She'd prepared evidence of Volkov's own ties to sanctioned individuals, documented connections to money laundering schemes, communications that showed he'd been coordinating with others to target Marcus even before his death. "We're not just going to defend," Patricia said. "We're going to hit back, file countersuits for harassment, for attempted fraud, for defamation, make it expensive and painful for him to keep attacking you. For Morrison, she had evidence that his embezzlement had been far more extensive than Marcus had initially pursued. We let him walk away the first time because Marcus wanted to avoid the publicity. But if he comes at you, I'll file criminal complaints. I'll make sure everyone in his industry knows what he did." And for Vivian Chen, she had documentation proving that every single claim Vivian had ever made was false. She's never had any legitimate business relationship with Marcus's family, never invested money in his company, never had any inheritance stolen. It's pure fabrication, and we can prove it definitively. "Why didn't Marcus do this before?" I asked. "Because he was focused on the work," Patricia said. "He didn't want to spend time and energy fighting these people when he could be helping others. But now? Now they're coming after you. Coming after his children's future. Different situation entirely." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp eyes. "Marcus loved you quite remarkably, you know. The amount of time he spent preparing for this possibility, thinking through every angle, every attack vector, every way they might try to hurt you. He didn't just want you protected, he wanted you positioned to win." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. All three of them would be there, Volkov, Morrison, and Vivian, united in their attacks, even though their motivations were different. James helped me prepare, explained what would happen, what questions might be asked, how to present myself. But mostly he told me to just be honest. "Tell the truth," he said. "You didn't know about any of this until Marcus died. You're still learning. You're a widow with 2 children trying to understand what your husband left you. That's all true, and it's compelling." We met 3 times in the week before the hearing. James walked me through possible questions, helped me understand the legal terminology, explained what Patricia would be arguing and why. "They'll try to make you look incompetent," he said. "Suggest you're not capable of managing these assets. They'll imply Marcus was shady and you were either complicit or willfully blind." "What if I was?" I asked. "Willfully blind, I mean. What if I should have asked more questions?" James looked at me for a long moment. "You trusted your husband. That's not a character flaw. That's love." The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Not too expensive, nothing flashy. Just a simple black suit I'd bought for Marcus's funeral. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I almost didn't recognize. Thinner than I'd been before. Harder somehow. Changed. I'd asked my mother-in-law's sister to watch Tyler and Zoe for the day. She was one of the few relatives who'd stayed in touch after Marcus died, who'd sent cards on the children's birthdays, who'd called occasionally to check on us. But at the last minute, I changed my mind. I called James. "I want to bring the kids," I said. "To the hearing?" "Yes, I want them to see this. I want them to understand that their father wasn't a criminal, that what these people are saying isn't true." James was quiet for a moment. "That's a bold choice." "Is it a bad one?" "No," he said slowly. "I think it might be brilliant. Patricia should know, though. It changes the optics." I called Patricia. She agreed immediately. "Bring them. Let the judge see what's really at stake here. Not just money and assets, your children's future, their understanding of their father's legacy." The courtroom was in the Federal Building on Market Street, all marble and authority. Patricia met me outside, along with James and another man I didn't know, someone from Marcus's network who handled security. Ahmed, the security specialist I'd met on the 4th floor. He was in his 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. He nodded to me, then positioned himself between my children and the crowd. "They'll try to intimidate you," Patricia said. "Stare you down. Make you feel small. Don't let them. You belong here as much as they do. More, actually, because you're telling the truth." We walked in together, and there they were, sitting with their legal team at a table across the aisle. Volkov in an expensive suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. Morrison looking angry and entitled. Vivian Chen with perfect makeup and cold eyes. They looked at me like I was nothing, like I was an obstacle to be removed. I looked back and thought about everything Marcus had left me. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd believed I could become. And I thought about my children sitting behind me, watching, learning what it meant to stand up for truth, learning that you don't have to accept other people's lies about who you are or who you love. The judge entered and we all stood. Her name was Sandra Weinstein, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. She reviewed the filings in silence for what felt like forever. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Could hear Zoe and Tyler breathing where they sat behind me with James, because I'd brought them, because I wanted them to see this. When Judge Weinstein finally looked up, her expression could have cut glass. "I've been on this bench for 22 years, she said, "and rarely have I seen such a transparent attempt to defraud a widow and her children." Patricia's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. "The plaintiff's claims are not only without merit," Judge Weinstein continued. "The evidence suggests coordination and premeditation that borders on criminal conspiracy. Mr. Volkov's alleged concerns about financial irregularities appear to stem entirely from his own connections to sanctioned entities. Mr. Morrison's claims about fraud are contradicted by his own signed agreements from 15 years ago, and Ms. Chen's allegations about stolen inheritance are simply fabricated from whole cloth. She turned to look directly at them. Did you truly believe that filing these motions simultaneously, using nearly identical language, would somehow obscure the fact that you're acting in concert? Did you think this court wouldn't notice? Volkov's lawyer tried to object, to explain, but Judge Weinstein cut him off. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in facts, and the facts are these. Mrs. Chen's late husband left her a complex estate that she is still in the process of understanding. She has committed no fraud. She has violated no laws. She is simply trying to manage what her husband left her while raising 2 children alone. She looked at the papers in front of her again. All claims are dismissed, with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. Additionally, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay Mrs. Chen's legal fees, which I note are substantial and entirely justified given the breadth of these attacks. Patricia squeezed my hand again, harder this time. Furthermore, Judge Weinstein said, I am referring this matter to federal prosecutors for investigation into possible fraud and racketeering. The coordination between these parties, combined with what appears to be falsification of evidence, suggests criminal conduct that warrants thorough examination. She banged her gavel. This court is adjourned. I sat frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Behind me, I heard Tyler make a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Volkov's face had gone pale. Morrison was already standing, grabbing his briefcase, trying to leave. Vivian Chen sat perfectly still, her expression finally cracking into something that looked like shock. Patricia leaned over. That went even better than I'd hoped. What happens now? Now? Volkov will probably leave the country. Morrison might face criminal charges. Vivian will fade back into wherever she came from. They lost, completely and publicly, and everyone in their circles will know it. We walked out of the courtroom together, all of us. James, Patricia, the security specialist, Tyler, Zoe, and me. Out into the marble hallway where other cases were waiting, other lives being decided by judges and lawyers and documents. Tyler grabbed my hand, something he hadn't done in months. Did we win? He asked. Yes, I said. We won. Dad would be proud, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. I stopped walking, knelt down so I could look at both my children. The hallway was crowded, people flowing around us, but I didn't care. Your father was a good man, I said. Everything he did to help people, to protect people who needed protecting. And he left us the ability to keep doing that work, if we want to. Do you want to? Zoe asked. I thought about Elif, about the Ahmadi family, about all the names in James's files. People who needed help. People who needed someone to believe their truth was worth protecting. Yes, I said. I think I do. Volkov left the country within 48 hours. James told me later that he'd caught a flight to Moscow and wasn't likely to return. Morrison's lawyer withdrew from all his other cases, his reputation shredded by the judge's findings. Vivian disappeared back to California, her threats suddenly silent. But the victory, as complete as it was, as satisfying as it felt to watch them lose, wasn't the moment that broke me open and remade me. That came 3 days later. James brought me a locked box from the building's secure vault, a fireproof safe I didn't know existed. Inside was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, dated 1 week before the accident. I recognized his writing immediately, the way he formed his capital letters, the slight leftward slant he could never quite correct. My Claire, it began, and I had to stop reading, to breathe. Had to put the letter down on my desk in the brownstone study. Yes, the brownstone. Because James had taken me to see it the day after the hearing, and I still couldn't quite believe it existed. The brownstone was everything the deed had promised, and more. 4 bedrooms, each one painted in soft neutrals. A kitchen with marble countertops and appliances I'd only ever seen in magazines. A back garden with a fountain and raised beds ready for planting. Marcus had furnished it. Every room decorated with care, with things he knew I'd love. A reading nook in the master bedroom with a window seat overlooking the square. A studio space on the 3rd floor with north-facing windows, perfect for painting even though I hadn't painted in years. "He said you used to paint," James had explained when he showed me. "He wanted you to have space to do it again." I'd stood in that studio and cried, looking at the easel already set up, at the blank canvases stacked against the wall, at the paints and brushes organized in drawers. Marcus had remembered something I'd told him on our 3rd date, that I'd wanted to be an artist before my family convinced me it was impractical, before I'd given up and studied something sensible instead. "My Claire," I read again when I could see through the blur. "If you're reading this, I've run out of time to say these things to your face, so I'll say them here instead. I'll say them as clearly as I can, because you need to hear them, and I need you to believe them." My hands were shaking. I set the letter on the desk and smoothed it flat, trying to steady myself. "You think you're ordinary?" Marcus had written. "Your family convinced you of this, trained you to believe it. Your parents with their talk about stopping it too, about you being the complication, the unexpected one. Your brothers with their condescension, their assumption that you'd never amount to anything they'd consider important. Your sister with her silent agreement, her complicity in making you small." The words hit like hammers. How had he known? How had he seen it so clearly when I'd barely been able to name it myself? "They're wrong, Claire. They've always been wrong. You are not ordinary. You are not a complication. You are not the mistake they treated you like." I had to stop again, put my hand over my mouth to keep the sound in. "You are the person I built my entire adult life around. Every choice I made after meeting you was oriented toward your North Star. The business, the money, the network. Yes, it serves a purpose in the world. Yes, it helps people who need help. But it was also always a way to build you the life you deserved. The life your family said you shouldn't want. The life they said was beyond you." I thought about the first time I'd brought Marcus home to meet my parents. How nervous I'd been. How certain they'd find something wrong with him. How they'd questioned everything. Where he'd gone to school, what his parents did, whether his business was sustainable. How they'd told me afterward that I should be careful, that he seemed too good to be true, that there was probably something I didn't know, and how Marcus had held my hand in the car ride home and said, "They don't see you. They have no idea who you are." I'd asked what he meant, and he'd just smiled and said, "You're extraordinary. They treat you like you're ordinary. It's their loss, not yours. I never told you about my past because I wanted to protect you from it." And the letter continued, "That was selfish and wrong, and I'm sorry. You should have been my partner in all of it. You should have known what we were building together, what risks we were taking, what enemies we might face." He'd written an entire paragraph that was crossed out, words I couldn't read through the heavy pen strokes. Then started fresh. But I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the risks, you'd ask me to stop. Afraid that if you understood how dangerous it could be, you'd choose safety over the work. And I couldn't stop, Claire, because the work matters. People live because of what we built. Families stay together. Truth gets told. Evidence gets preserved. Corruption gets exposed. I thought about Elif, the journalist from Turkey, whose extraction I'd approved just 3 months after discovering all this. How she'd looked when we met for coffee last week. How she'd told me about writing her book, about her daughters learning English, about building a new life. "I've set everything up so you can continue this if you want," Marcus wrote. "James knows everything. Patricia knows everything. The 23 people in the network are ready to help you. Or you can walk away. Take the money, raise our beautiful children, and live whatever life you choose. Either way, you'll be provided for, you'll be protected, you'll be free. The word free was underlined twice. But I hope you'll choose to continue, not because the work needs you, though it does, because you need the work. You need to know what you're capable of. You need to see yourself the way I see you. He'd written that sentence and then left space, like he'd stopped to think about what came next. Brilliant, fierce, unstoppable. Those are the words I'd use, but they're not enough. You're someone who sees problems and solves them, who sees injustice and can't look away, who makes people feel safe enough to tell the truth. That's not ordinary, Claire. That's extraordinary. That's rare. I pressed my hands flat against the desk to steady myself, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. Your parents were wrong. You weren't the mistake. You were never the mistake. You were always exactly who you needed to be. And if they couldn't see that, if they were too small and scared and limited to recognize what they had, that's their tragedy, not yours. There was a coffee stain on the bottom of the page, like he'd set his mug down while writing. Such a small detail, such an ordinary thing, and it made him feel close enough to touch. Build something beautiful with what I've left you, he wrote. Build it for yourself. Build it for Tyler and Zoe, so they grow up knowing what their mother is capable of. Build it for the people who need help. Build it to prove your family wrong. Build it because you can. His signature at the bottom was just M. Like all his notes to me had been. Like all the sticky notes he used to leave on the bathroom mirror when he traveled. M loves C. M misses C. M will be home Tuesday. God, I'd thrown all those notes away. Why had I thrown them away? Love is too small a word for what I feel, he'd written as a postscript, squeezed in at the very bottom of the page. But it's the word we have, so I'll use it. I love you. I loved you every day we had. I'll love you in whatever comes after this. Yours, Marcus. I read the letter 7 times before I could see straight. Read it until I'd memorized every word, every crossed-out phrase, every place where his pen had pressed harder into the paper. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the box and went upstairs to where my children were doing homework at the kitchen table in the brownstone, in the home Marcus had built for us. The kitchen was warm and bright, afternoon sun streaming through windows that faced the back garden. Tyler had his math book open, frowning at algebra problems. Zoe was practicing cursive, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. They looked up when I came in, and I saw Marcus in both their faces. Tyler had his father's eyes, that particular amber brown. Zoe had his smile, the one that started slow and then transformed her whole face. Mom? Zoe looked up. Are you okay? I wasn't okay. I was broken open and remade. I was terrified and furious and grateful and strong. I was everything at once. I'm perfect, I said. Come here, both of you. I need to tell you about your father. We sat together in the living room. On the couch Marcus had chosen, in the house he'd prepared for us. And I told them everything. About his childhood in Poland. About his father's defection. About the network he'd built to protect people. Tyler listened with fierce attention, occasionally asking questions. Zoe cried a little, sad that her father had carried so many secrets, but proud too. So Dad was like a superhero, she said when I finished. Yes, I agreed. Exactly like that. Are you going to be a superhero too? Tyler asked. I thought about James waiting for my decisions, about Patricia ready to file more cases, about the 23 people in the network, ready to help whoever needed help next. I'm going to try, I said. That weekend I called my mother, not because I'd forgiven her, not because I was ready to let them back in, but because I needed to say something I should have said years ago. She answered on the second ring, her voice careful. Claire? I'm moving, I said. Out of Fishtown. I wanted you to know. Oh, a pause. Are you struggling? Because we could help if you need to move somewhere smaller. I own a brownstone in Rittenhouse Square, I said, and the words felt powerful in my mouth. 4 bedrooms, completely renovated. Marcus bought it for me before he died, and I own the building where his company operated. 8 stories in Old City. And I have controlling interest in 7 businesses doing work that actually matters in the world. Silence on the other end. Complete silence. I could picture her face. The shock, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation of everything she thought she knew about my life. So no, I continued. I won't be moving somewhere smaller. I won't be struggling. I won't need your help. But you should know. You should understand. The next time you want to see your grandchildren, you'll need to apologize. To them and to me. Claire, I don't think you'll need to apologize for suggesting their father was a criminal, for saying I was a mistake. For every year you made me feel like I was less than my brothers, like I was the disappointing one, the complication, the one who got everything wrong. My mother made a sound like she might cry, that particular wobble in her voice she used when she wanted sympathy. I didn't give her any. Marcus taught me the difference between what people say and what they mean, I said. He taught me to look at actions, not words. He taught me that I don't have to accept other people's narratives about who I am. So I'm not accepting yours anymore. We never said, yes, you did. You said it when I was 7 and asked why I couldn't be more like Derek. You said it when I was 15 and wanted to apply to art school. You said it when I told you I was marrying Marcus and you asked if I was sure he'd stay interested. You've been saying it my whole life. I took a breath. You have my number when you're ready to apologize. Until then, stay away from me and my children. I hung up before she could respond. Before she could cry or argue or try to make me feel guilty. Hung up and felt something like freedom spread through my chest. 3 months passed. Tyler and Zoe adjusted to the brownstone faster than I did. They loved having their own rooms, loved the view of Rittenhouse Square, loved being able to walk to the good pizza place and the bookstore and the park. I adjusted to running a network that helped people tell dangerous truths. James briefed me every morning on active cases. The journalist in Hungary who'd exposed government corruption and needed extraction. The whistleblower in Texas who'd revealed healthcare fraud and needed legal protection. The refugee family in Lebanon who'd helped document war crimes and needed relocation. We helped them all. Quietly, carefully, with the resources Marcus had built and the team he'd assembled. The journalist from Hungary was named Kata. She'd been investigating ties between the government and organized crime, had documented payments, meetings, criminal enterprises operating with state protection. Her editor had been arrested. Her sources had gone silent. Someone had left a dead bird on her doorstep with a note, "Stop writing or this will be you." I approved her extraction personally, worked with James and Ahmed to plan every detail, created documentation, arranged travel, secured housing. She arrived in Philadelphia on a Tuesday, exhausted and terrified but alive. I met her at the Safe House, an apartment in West Philadelphia that looked ordinary from the outside but had security systems that would alert us to any threat. "Thank you," she said in halting English. "You saved my life." I learned how to read encrypted communications, how to structure financial transfers that couldn't be traced, how to assess risk and make decisions about who to help and how. I learned the language of this work, the particular vocabulary of protection and exposure and truth. And I learned that I was good at it, better than I'd expected, better than my family had ever imagined I could be at anything. The journalist from Hungary made it out safely with her family. The whistleblower in Texas won his case and got his job back with damages. The refugee family got settled in Toronto with documentation that would protect them from retaliation. Every time we succeeded, every time we helped someone, I thought about Marcus's letter. "Build something beautiful," he'd written, I was building it. Day by day, case by case, choice by choice. One Tuesday afternoon, James brought Elif to meet me, the Turkish journalist we'd extracted, the one who'd made it out with her husband and daughters. She'd been in Philadelphia for 4 months now, writing her book, rebuilding her life. She brought Turkish coffee and pastries from a bakery in Northeast Philadelphia, set them on my desk with careful ceremony. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not just for helping us escape. Anyone with money could do that. But for believing the story mattered. For understanding that some truths have to be told even when telling them is dangerous." She pulled out a manuscript, bound in blue covers. "My book," she explained. "The one I couldn't publish in Turkey. The one that made me a target." I looked at the title page. "For the people who believe truth is worth protecting," the dedication read. "For Marcus and Claire Chen, who made this possible." My throat got tight. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Elif said. "I wanted people to know. This book will be published in 14 languages. Hundreds of thousands of people will read it, and they'll know that people like you exist. People who help when helping is hard." After she left, I sat with the manuscript for a long time. Thought about Marcus recording that video, explaining his past, trusting me with everything. Thought about him building this network, this capacity to protect truth-tellers. Thought about my parents saying I was a mistake, and Marcus writing that I was extraordinary. The letter from my mother arrived 4 months after our last conversation. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope. That particular careful script she used when she was trying to be formal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not an apology, not exactly, but an invitation. "We'd like to see the children," she'd written. "And we'd like to see your new home, if you're willing to show us. We understand we need to talk. We understand there are things we need to say. Sunday at 4, if you'll have us." I held the letter for 3 days before responding. Showed it to James, to Patricia, to Tyler and Zoe. Asked them what they thought. "They hurt you," Tyler said. "Why would you let them back in?" "Because they're your grandparents," I said. "And because sometimes people can change. Sometimes they can learn." "Do you think they have?" Zoe asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I'm strong enough now to find out." I wrote back finally. Just one line. "Sunday at 4. My address is below. Come ready to listen." They came. All of them. My parents, Derek, Jason, Rachel. They stood on the steps of the brownstone looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen them uncertain before. My father kept looking up at the facade, at the address numbers, like he couldn't quite believe this was the right place. My mother clutched her purse tightly. Derek and Jason exchanged looks but didn't speak. I let them in. Watched their faces as they took in the entry hall with its restored moldings, the living room with its carefully chosen furniture, the art on the walls that Marcus and I had collected together. My mother touched the frame of a painting we'd bought in Prague, her fingers gentle. "This is beautiful." "Marcus chose it," I said. "He had good taste." We sat in the living room, awkward and formal. Tyler and Zoe came down from their rooms but didn't sit, just stood near the doorway watching. My father cleared his throat. "This is quite a place." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." Silence. Derek looked at Jason. Rachel studied her hands. Finally, my mother said, "We owe you an apology." "Yes," I said. "You do. We shouldn't have said those things. About Marcus. About you. About the children. We were scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you," my father said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You married someone we didn't know, someone who seemed too good to be true. You built a life we didn't understand. And when he died, when all these complications emerged, we thought we were helping, thought we were protecting you." "By telling my children their father was a criminal?" I asked. "By saying I was a mistake?" "No," my mother said quickly. That was wrong, completely wrong. I don't know what we were thinking. You were thinking what you've always thought, I said. That I was the disappointing one, the unexpected one, the daughter who didn't turn out right. Derek spoke up. We never— Yes, you did. I looked at him directly. You've treated me like I was less than you my whole life. You and Jason both. Made it clear that your success in finance was more important, more impressive, more valuable than anything I could do. We were idiots, Jason said. It was possibly the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. Rachel had tears in her eyes. We were scared you'd be better than us. And you are. You are better than us. I'm not better, I said. I'm just different, and there's nothing wrong with different. My father asked then what I did now, how I spent my time. And I made a choice in that moment to tell them the truth. I run a network that helps people tell dangerous truths, I said. Journalists, whistleblowers, refugees. People who've exposed corruption or documented human rights abuses, or revealed information that powerful people want hidden. We protect them, give them resources, legal support, security. We help them get to safety. Marcus built it. I'm expanding it. The silence that followed was different this time. Not uncomfortable. Odd. That sounds dangerous, my mother said finally. It is, I agreed. It's also necessary, and I'm good at it. Tyler moved from the doorway to stand beside me. Mom's a hero, he said. Like Dad was. I looked at my son and saw Marcus in the set of his jaw, the directness of his gaze, saw the way he'd learned to stand up for what mattered. Your father, I said, looking at my parents as I spoke, was not a mistake. This life is not a mistake. And I was never, ever a mistake. I was exactly who I needed to be to do this work. My mother's eyes filled, and for the first time in my memory, she didn't look away, didn't dab at her tears with a tissue and make it about her pain. Just let them fall. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it, for every time we made you feel small, for every time we suggested you weren't enough. You're more than enough. You're remarkable. They didn't ask to come back into my life that day, didn't presume that one apology would fix decades of damage. But they listened, really listened, asked questions about the work I was doing, about how Tyler and Zoe were adjusting, about what I needed. Derek, of all people, offered to help with financial planning. Not trying to take over, he said quickly. Just, if you want another perspective on the investments, on how to structure things for tax purposes. I know some people who specialize in complex estates. Jason offered to teach Tyler about finance, if Tyler was interested. Start him young, he said. Give him tools we never gave you. Rachel just hugged me, held on for a long moment and whispered, I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry I didn't. After they left, Tyler asked if I thought they'd really changed. I think they're trying, I said. I think seeing this place, understanding what I actually do, it forced them to reconsider their assumptions. Whether that sticks, we'll see. Do you want them back in your life? I want them to be better grandparents to you and Zoe, I said. I want them to see you clearly, the way they never saw me. Beyond that, I don't know yet. That night I sat in my study, the study Marcus had designed for me in the home he built for my future. I took his letter out of the top drawer where I kept it and read it again, the way I did most nights. Build something beautiful, he'd written. I looked around at the shelves lined with books, at the photographs on the wall, at the window facing Rittenhouse Square. Thought about Elif and her family safe in Philadelphia. Thought about the journalist in Hungary who'd made it out. Thought about all the people we'd helped, all the truth we'd protected. I thought about my children sleeping upstairs in their own rooms, in this house that was ours, free from the fear and grief that had consumed us in the first year after Marcus died. I thought about my parents learning to see me differently, My siblings learning that success looked like more than a corner office and a big salary. I thought about James and Patricia and the 23 others in the network, people who believed in the work enough to dedicate their lives to it. I thought about Marcus sitting in his office 3 years ago, recording that video, building all of this for me to find, believing I could do it even when I didn't believe it myself. Build something beautiful, he'd written. I am, my love. Every day I am. The work continues. More people come needing help. More truth needs protecting. More powerful people want silence maintained. And I'm here. Not the disappointing daughter my parents thought they had. Not the widow they expected me to become. I'm Claire Chen. I run a network that protects truth tellers. I own a brownstone in Rittenhouse Square and a building in Old City. I have resources and knowledge and power I never imagined possessing. I am exactly who Marcus believed I could be. Exactly who I needed to become. And I was never, ever a mistake. Research shows that family validation plays a crucial role in individual development and self-esteem. Studies by the American Psychological Association indicate that children who receive consistent, unconditional support from family members develop stronger self-concepts and greater resilience. Conversely, conditional acceptance based on achievement or conformity can create lasting patterns of self-doubt and external validation seeking that persist into adulthood. The most powerful transformations often occur when individuals find alternative sources of validation and begin to see themselves through new frameworks. Marcus's letter to Claire demonstrates the profound impact of being truly seen by another person. Being recognized for capabilities that others overlook, being valued for qualities that others dismiss. This recognition can become a foundation for rebuilding self-concept. And sometimes, when we finally see ourselves clearly, the people who couldn't see us before begin to see us differently too. Not because we changed to meet their expectations, but because we stopped needing their approval to know our own worth. If this story resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you thought, or share a time when you proved someone wrong about who you were. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got more stories like this coming. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing this community spans the globe. And speaking of the next video, you absolutely need to see the story on your screen right now. It's about a woman who discovered her late husband's secret will and what happened when his family tried to take everything from her children. Trust me, you don't want to miss how she handled them. Click now